Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to do a non-spoiler review for A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. In my opinion, this has been one of T. Kingfisher's best books, not just because it has a lot of what appeals to me about her writing, but because there are so many things at play that really showcase her strengths. And if you don't know, T. Kingfisher has written in a lot of different genres. As an example, she's written in fantasy, of course. She also has written within horror. She has written fantasy romance. And then she's also written different age ranges. So you'll see that she has works like A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking, which I love, as middle grade. And then you see her writing within different subgenres within different age ranges. So as an example, with fantasy, she has Nettle and Bone, which I absolutely adored. And that is more so leaning into grim fairy tale. And what's great about A Sorceress Comes to Call is that I think it somewhat transcends all individual categories, but I also think I don't really feel it's that important to try to put it in a box and say, no, this is fantasy, no, this is horror, because it just pulls from elements of all of those different genres. The setup for the story is that you follow a young girl named Cordelia as well as a woman named Hester. Cordelia is the daughter of a very terrible woman who has the ability to use magic. She is a sorceress. However, sorceresses aren't really known to exist, and there's rumors of them, but people think if they do exist, they mostly just use their magic to cheat at card games and things like that. They don't actually think that they are that much of a threat. You see through Cordelia's perspective that her mother absolutely is a threat, and she is very dangerous. When she uses her magic, she is very capable, and she can do extraordinary things with it. Cordelia has no means of escaping her mother. She cannot get out from under her thumb. She can't tell anybody. And anytime she even has a glimpse of maybe a life outside of her mother, something occurs. Her mother will do something to put her back into her place. And it's very difficult to watch unfold. I absolutely feel that T. Kingfisher, and this is getting into somewhat tragic territory here, but she really, even though we're looking at a mother who is able to use magic to abuse her daughter, obviously in real life, many human beings have experienced abuse, and there was nothing magical about it. So in a sense, I think it can be difficult to still bring about something that feels very realistic to that kind of experience because of the fact that you're adding a fantasy element in. But there were so many aspects to how Cordelia behaves, her internal thoughts, the internal monologue, I should say, that you get from time to time throughout the story, and the way in which she perceives things, her quietness about certain things, how difficult it is to actually speak up for yourself when you're in a scenario like this. All those pieces contributed to you immediately feeling for the character, immediately feeling like, oh my gosh, I am rooting for her. I want her to get out of this situation, but also recognizing the stakes and not knowing how she was going to get out. And again, I really want to emphasize how much, even though there was a magical component to this, how much that parallels the actual experience of people who have not only been in abusive relationships of some kind, but especially children who have abusive parents. And I think that T. Kingfisher handled this exceptionally. As an example, there is a lot to do with how much invasion of privacy the mother inflicts, I'll say, onto Cordelia. And one of the ways in which she does this is she always demands that all the doors be open in the house, that Cordelia never is allowed to close a door. Being able, as a kid, to close my door, to escape, basically, some of the things that were occurring, that in and of itself, it made you feel like at least I have this little barrier, at least I have this protection and this sense of self and privacy, and like I can escape, even though it's the opposite of escaping. You're literally holding yourself up into a smaller space. That feeling, though, was absolutely represented in this book. And just, I immediately wanted so badly to pull the character out from this story and out and away from her horrible mother. And that is just the beginning. So the way in which the other perspective comes into the story is that Cordelia's mother is determined to find a wealthy man and do everything she can to seduce him. She can't really use magic to marry someone because if she does, there's power in ceremony. So she knows as soon as there's a marriage ceremony that may break any level of magical seduction that she has placed on whoever her future husband may be. And if she wants to maintain a life with a wealthy husband, she has to try and get him to marry her without using magic. So she finds a man that she thinks like, okay, I think I can seduce this man and I can have this nice life for us. Isn't that what you want, Cordelia? Don't you want a nice life? And then once I establish that for us, then we can marry you off. And Cordelia is just quietly like, whatever, because her mother, if Cordelia even tries to disobey, her mother can control her body. And the way that T. Kingfisher wrote that, it was horrifying, and it's like new fear unlocked. The idea of your body even though it's not like a new concept, it's not like T. Kingfisher came up with the idea of someone else controlling your body and possession, basically. The way she writes it in this, it's visceral and it's terrible, and I hated it, but at the same time I hated it because of how well it was written. But back to the secondary perspective, the sister of the man that Cordelia's mother has decided this is who I'm going to try to seduce. The sister is our other perspective. She is hilarious. She's fantastic. One of the things that I have noted in doing more community-based videos in the past and getting your perspectives on things is a lot of you really appreciate when we get characters who are not necessarily the norm. And one of the ways in which we have made certain requests is that collectively we're like, it'd be great to see characters that are a little bit older, and Hester fits that. It's not just that her age is older, it's that she actually acts her age. She's wise. She often is like, my knee, and that actually plays a role. Like, her body is not fresh and new, and she has certain injuries that affect her day-to-day life. She hates the stairs, which I'm like, clock to anybody? But anyway, so she's amazing. I loved this character, and as soon as Cordelia and her mother enter the picture, she's like, I know what this lady's about. She reads it immediately, but she also recognizes my brother's kind of like infatuated, so I'll be nice, but I have my eye on this lady. However, you, as the reader, you're like, I know what that woman is capable of, meaning the sorceress, and so I don't want Hester to make it known that she knows what she's all about, the sorceress. So I'm really scared of what's going to happen to Hester because I love her so much already, and I don't want anything bad to happen to her, but something bad's going to happen because I've seen it through Cordelia's perspective, and Cordelia is just like, quietly sort of just trying to listen to whatever her mother has to say, but Cordelia is very accustomed to her life being impacted by her mother's actions. What she is not accustomed to is seeing her mother harming other people. And that's when you actually start to see things really kick into gear, and when Cordelia starts to open up a little bit to the possibility of pushing back, which is a very empowering thing to witness, and you just so strongly root for her. Regardless, the horror elements in this are phenomenally done. I think that the fantasy elements were great. It certainly has, once again, that grim fairy tale feel, like something like Nettle and Bone captured really well. And I mentioned before, it's funny. Mainly because of Hester, but also because T. Kingfisher is funny, and it just feels like she can't help but be funny within her stories. And it's not just the characters that are funny, it's like the writing itself. She just finds ways, and I'm going to read an example, to word things that you're like, oh, that was clever. It's almost sometimes subtle and sneaky, and you hardly realize it's there until you're like, wait a second, and it takes a moment, but I really love it. And an example of this is Hester in seeing like, oh, my brother he's locked in, and he's super into this woman who she doesn't know is a sorceress, but she's like, geez. So she's thinking about her brother, and it says, like many men not overly encumbered by intelligence, he had a great deal of cunning in avoiding personal unpleasantness. And this is in regards to the fact that her brother has remained unmarried for a really long time, and he's always like, I don't want to be tied down. And the idea of describing somebody as overly encumbered, like many, not overly encumbered by intelligence. Like, that's such a funny way to say, like, they're kind of dumb. And I loved it. And there's so many instances where I was like, that was hilarious. That was hilarious. And I, in part, listened to this on audio. And I was actually kind of sad about it because there were times where I didn't have the ability to go tap something really quick. And I wish I had, because just the amount of snarkiness within this, and Hester just being Hester, is great. While I have mentioned these two perspectives, Hester and Cordelia, there are a lot of side characters that come into the picture that are delightful, charming, charismatic, funny, ridiculous, and I just loved, even though they weren't on the page that much, I just loved so many of the characters within this. And then the setting itself is done very well. There's a couple of different settings as we do sort of move a few different times. And every single one of the settings brought about a new element to the aesthetic, the atmosphere, and why this new area is creepy. So you start in one area and it's just what Cordelia is familiar with. So when you go to the next area, she's not familiar with it anymore. You're introducing new people, and there's sort of this eerie, almost gothic mansion feel in a sense. And then later you go to a different location, and when you start to know more what the mother's capable of, everything feels dangerous. And there are times where I was caught off guard by just how dangerous that woman was. You're really like, how are they going to get out of this? And something that I think fantasy does really well is establish really, really high stakes. And part of how fantasy can do this is when somebody is so much more powerful than someone else, oftentimes your heroes or your protagonists. And you don't know. You're wondering the whole time, how are they ever going to get out of this? And every little thing makes you nervous and worried that somebody's not going to make it. But the thing is, usually I think that's established really well in epic stories or in high fantasy, because you have these magic systems and you have people that are of nobility or are at the top of some kind of caste system. So to have this really very personal, intimate setting and set of characters, and then to have that same feeling of like, how are they ever going to defeat this person? To have that feeling, it seems more in line with what you would see within thrillers and horror stories, but mixed in with the magic of fantasy and the grim fairy tale feel of so many fantasy stories. It was just phenomenal. I absolutely love this. This is, for me, among my favorites by T. Kingfisher, and if you've never tried her works before, I definitely think A Sorceress Comes to Call is a good one to try out. If you're somebody who dips your toes in a lot of different genres, I think this is a great one to try out, and if you like it, you can kind of decide what you liked about it, and then sort of branch out from there into her very large list of works. But that's it for some non-spoiler thoughts on A Sorceress Comes to Call. Highly recommend it. I absolutely think too, if you're a mood reader, this is the perfect book to not only pick up in the fall, but especially October. I think it is perfect for that month for mood readers out there. But even if you're not a mood reader, I just think this is worth picking up in general. Absolutely loved it. Thought it was fantastic. A favorite of the year, a new favorite T. Kingfisher work. Highly recommend. But if you're interested in checking it out, I'll have it linked in the description bar down below. Let me know. I am curious, for those of you that have read T. Kingfisher, what would you say is your favorite work by her? And is that favorite work this one, if you've picked it up? Have a great rest of your day, though. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye.